I'd like to talk a little bit about perspective. Yesterday, we heard a lot of perspectives, and a lot of them made suggestions about how M&R could do the job differently or better or differently. Right now, the ministry is looking at about 10,000 different perspectives that result from the environmental registry posting on some changes that were being proposed on regulations related to the ESA. Most of those perspectives, it's heartening that many of those perspectives we've heard before. But every now and then, buried in all of those 10,000 or listening to some of the really thoughtful comments yesterday, there's a few nuggets. And the folks in the ministry, our job is to take those nuggets and turn them into something useful to make the policies or the programs or the implementation of the ESA just that much better. We start with a single project. If you think of a single population of red-side dace in a single stream segment a few years ago, and we had some ideas of how to deal with it. Maybe we put up some silt fence. Our objective was to keep the turbidity in the water unchanged and keep the temperature unchanged. So we planted some trees in the riparian zone, or planted some shrubs, or did some plantings in the riparian zone, and whatever we did, we were successful. So that turned into a more common approach. Oh, well, this worked this time. Let's use that perspective to model future similar permit requests. So it gets a little bigger, and that becomes, okay, we were successful there. This is a good approach. We've learned from that experience. Let's develop a little bit of a policy, a small p policy approach. When we get red-side dace or whatever the species is, here's a good set of principles and policies and objectives and outcomes to ensure the species is protected. That then turns into maybe a streamlined system. Okay, we don't need to go through that permitting process anymore because we know exactly what to do. We know what's been successful with that species. So let's put in a system that automatically issues that permit. That's one of the proposals we've got right now. We can go into policy, then we go into mechanization. All of that's a growth process that the ESA is going through right now. And all of that happens because people share perspectives and communicate. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of, I'm not going to read this whole slide, don't worry, of sort of the 6 different ways that the ministry implements the face of permitting in M&R, or instruments, the face of allowing activities to happen on the ground in concert with the protection of the species that those activities could affect. So we've got 6 different instruments. We have an instrument, we call them A, B, C, and D, or 18s or 19s. But one is a health and safety permit. It deals with health and safety issues, sort of emergencies, or not emergencies, but urgent pressing activities. We have protection or recovery permits, deal with scientific collection, sort of good activities, or activities that are good for the species, but still require some interaction with the species. They're our most common. The big one, the most sometimes controversial, is a C permit, the overall benefit permit. That's to construct a road or construct a subdivision or a wind power, water power facility, all those things. A big permit, a D permit, is for significant social or economic projects that bring significant social or economic benefits to the province. Excuse me. And then there are 2 sections of the Act that allow us to make agreements or to look at instruments in other acts or other issues. Section 18 gives us the opportunity to work with another piece of legislation, approval under another piece of legislation, and if it achieves the objectives of the ESA, we can integrate with it. So we haven't formally gone down the Section 18 path to completion, but we're looking actively at ways we can integrate our approvals with others' approvals, and we're actively trying to do that. And then there's Section 19, which does a similar thing with agreements with Aboriginal communities and organizations. So the workload, is that the workload? Yes. Since the Act was enacted, we've issued nearly 500 permits. We've entered into over 200 agreements. But the trajectory, that's in 5 years, the trajectory is taking off. There was a slide yesterday about population growth in the country, or in the world, or global population growth, and I think permitting growth is on the same trajectory. To some degree, that's because we have a number of new species coming into getting habitat protection in a few months, and we expect that will increase our permit demand. What's not said in this slide is that every year we receive thousands, literally thousands of inquiries for permits. And in the vast majority of those cases, it's really important to understand that we can work with the proponent, work with whoever's proposing this activity, and find a way to avoid even needing a permit, finding a way to avoid any impact on the species. So we're turning away, not turning away, it's not the best, we're avoiding permitting by avoiding the species. And that happens in the vast majority of cases. When we finally get to permitting, we go through a process, and I'll talk a little bit about some of that. Some of the challenges associated with permitting can be directly related to communications. I heard yesterday a few times folks talk about the amount of time it takes to get a permit. Now, 9 months or a year. And I can honestly say, and this is true of all resource management, it's not just the ESA, and it's really public decision making is this way. It's directly proportional to the willingness of the parties to communicate. So, if it takes 2 weeks to respond to a question, and it takes 2 weeks to answer the question, and it takes 2 more weeks to get back and respond back and forth every time there's a question, yes, it's going to take 9 months. But if you get together and think logically through it, you can get through the process, you can be through a lot faster. And that goes to the willingness to communicate in an open and above board manner. I think many permittees will tell you that where there's been a positive relationship, where communication has flown in both directions, then permits flow. So communications is important, information is important. And we know we've got information gaps, and we know that we're working really hard to get information to proponents, to decision makers, to scientists and field biologists who are helping to craft these decisions. But the gaps we have in that information, because we're still learning, can lead to some delays, or it can lead to the need to gather information. That might add time. But over time, we'll amass a base of knowledge, and we are amassing a base of knowledge that should lead to faster access to information technology. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I think if we can learn to communicate together, we'll resolve 90% of the challenges associated with the Act. What I want to really talk about is innovation. So the ministry has undertaken a number of activities to try and take an innovative approach to dealing with specific challenges, but also an umbrella of challenges that implementing the ESA results in. I think some of the communications vehicles we've established or that have been established, because lots of parties to the implementation of the Act have initiated these dialogues on their own, have really helped. So greater collaboration between stakeholders and developers. We've got the Species at Risk Public Advisory Committee gives us ongoing advice. The Bobolink Roundtable has proven to be a really successful vehicle to exchange information and perspectives. And I think over time, not too distant future, we're going to start seeing some really interesting recommendations coming out of the roundtable. And most recently, the ESA advisory panel that made recommendations to the minister on how to improve the implementation of the Act. We're certainly, as I described earlier, learning from our experience in permitting, in mitigation measures, in reviewing the steps we've taken and the measures we've taken to avoid, to mitigate, and to achieve an overall benefit. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot from our monitoring efforts, and as a result of those, I think we've been able to come up with some pretty interesting approaches to improving the implementation of the Act. So I'm going to talk for a minute about just on the surface some of the proposals, the improved business processes that the ministry's gone through. I want to talk a little bit about two neat things, the Species at Risk Benefits Exchange and our safe harbor, our approach to safe harbor proposals. So, sorry, I gotta flip around here. So if you've read the regulation proposals, and you've talked amongst yourselves and you've listened yesterday, you'll hear that we have learned a lot in 5 years. And as a result, we've proposed a number of approaches to streamlining the Act, streamlining the implementation of the Act based on a whole bunch of experience. So one of the things we've talked about and is in the proposal is a common approach to deal with specific species or specific activities where a proponent would register with M&R and then provide a whole bunch of information, and we could sort of automate the approvals process. We've looked at ways to minimize to avoid and minimize adverse effects using results-based outcomes. So, you know, I'll go back to the Red Side days where we talked about reducing turbidity or putting riparian plantings in place. But the outcome there is we want the turbidity of the water to be the same going into the proposed development area, and the temperature of the water to be the same going in as it's coming out. And if we can find interesting and creative ways to achieve that outcome, then that's what we should be focusing on. In all of the proposals we're looking at, we recognize it's something that we've talked a lot about in just in debates and discussions within M&R, is dealing with high-risk species. So species that are, sometimes we talk to them about last stand species, or species that are so endangered that their habitat is so critical, we wouldn't want stuff to happen in those. And we've talked about excluding those from the proposals and just requiring an individual to seek a permit on those. We don't want a cookie cutter species that are extremely sensitive. I'm going to talk a little bit about standardized methods to minimize adverse effects through the establishment of a toolbox. I'm going to talk a little bit about monitoring and adaptive management, and yeah, we'll just keep going on here. So if we're going to streamline approvals, we need a bunch of information, and we need some high quality information available to proponents, to ministry staff, to anybody who's involved, to stakeholders, anybody who's involved in making that decision. So we're actively trying to establish and create a toolbox of tools that can inform and help us make better decisions, help everybody make decisions, help stakeholders make better proposals. What's going to be included in the toolbox are a number of things that are already out there but are in various and assorted places. But it's things like best management practices, like survey protocols, habitat descriptions, mitigation strategies, our best examples of overall benefit that's been successful. I want to make that information available readily available in an easily searchable one-stop shop. And there's staff within the ministry sitting out here who are working actively every minute of their waking hour. Gail Jackson over there and her team are working really hard to create a toolbox that's accessible quickly, because we know we need it. We know we need it for July 1st, when those additional habitat protections come in place. So with that, we're focusing on specific species that are our highest priority, where there's a really significant intersect between industrial interests and those species. So we've taken the data we have. We know where residential development is happening and where those species intersect with that. It could be renewable energy, could be whatever. So we're working hard on that. Something that's very near to my heart, it's my economics background, is the Species at Risk Benefits Exchange. And this is, it's the economist in me, this is like a stock market. There's a buyer and a seller. In this case, the buyer is somebody who's seeking a permit in the ESA, and the seller is a steward, somebody who wants to protect species. And if you think of it in its simplest sense, and I'll use an example, if a developer, a residential developer or whoever, solar farm, needs to take up 100 acres of bobolink habitat, as part of their overall benefit, they have to find an offsetting and overall benefit, or an offsetting amount of land, and provide an overall benefit to protect or to provide that habitat. There are lots of landowners out there who have objectives to be stewards for similar lands, whether it be land stewards, formal land steward organizations, or private landowners. Their objectives are to protect those lands. So an exchange is really like a stock market. It's a mechanism for those people to come together and do a deal to protect those lands. And it may be, the value added may be a financial compensation along with the land. So that land that was perhaps being left untouched is now managed for grassland species. So it's managed for bobolink, and it becomes a long-term, long-range piece of protection. It's a really creative solution, and Tosh Garrick in our office has been working with the Bobolink Roundtable very closely to make it a reality. And I think in the not-too-distant future, we'll start seeing those exchanges. We know those exchanges are happening on a one-on-one basis between permittees and stewards, but we want to make it a more open and inclusive market. So that's really exciting. Pardon me. And finally, in order to make those lands just provide the landowner with a significant amount of additional protection or own peace of mind, we're looking at establishing a program of safe harbor. It's a policy of safe harbor that would encourage landowners to undertake conservation measures, but allow them to modify their land at a later date if they wish to. So if you have, the concept for us is, if you have land that has it's not habitat, but you can create habitat, and for 20 years you protect that habitat and becomes a species, I don't want to say a species sink, that's a bit of a worry for us. It becomes a strong habitat for a specific species for 20 years, and then you decide to sell your property, you're not perceived, a lot of landowners will say, I don't want to have a reduced value on my land if I have to sell it after 20 years because now it's got a species on it that it didn't have when I started. It's a concept that's used in the United States, or has been used in the United States for quite a while. And the interesting thing here is that with safe harbor lands, most landowners don't want to give up the species once they've come there. It's a really good opportunity for land steward organizations to protect their lands and still have the flexibility to be able to buy and sell if they need to at a later date. So we're looking at safe harbor. So those are some of the innovative approaches we're trying to take with species at risk. I'm sure that every single one of you out there has another idea, and we are open because we're government. We're open to listening to ideas and trying to find innovative solutions to get a piece of legislation moving and continuing to grow so that we can protect the species that it was intended to protect. So, thank you. Or Betty Jean. Oh, there's Betty Jean.